Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Beyond Wellbeing, Developing Resilience. So my name is Louis Marois, and I am a marketing manager here at Headspring. So this webinar is intended to be interactive. We'd like to hear from you. So please do send in your questions by using the Q&A here on the side of the application. We'll make sure to answer them during the webinar or at the end. We have actually a 10 minutes of Q&A session, so please do send them in. So today we're actually joined by Marieluise Maiwald, who is a development consultant, faculty member, and a coach. We also have Sudhanshu, who is an educator, consultant, and a leadership coach. And last but not least, we have Palsule, who is our editorial director and head of thought leadership. Hi guys, how are you today?
Hello, all good, thanks.
So Paul, I'll let the hand to you to start with the leadership diagnostic tool.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and hope you're all well and able to work okay and keeping safe. Sorry for that sudden leaping up there. I had to close my window because there was a huge noise going on outside. So let me just very briefly give some context the way Headspring looks at issues of leadership, and then the discussion will of course go into a certain aspect of it. So if you can see this leadership, it's a diagnostic tool, and the way we think about the kind of developing leaders and the kind of attributes and skills that they need to enhance, we start from the outside, the external pressures, what is affecting the business environment. And that's all the things from AI, geopolitical risks, demographics, and of course, COVID-19 would be a classic example. And then we ask, all right, well, which of those threats, which of those challenges really will affect your company, and therefore which competencies do you need? And that's where a lot of the diagnosis will take place. What are the kind of competencies that are going to help your company deal with the challenges from the external environment? But then we look a little bit deeper and we say, well, underpinning a lot of these competencies are some basic qualities, some of which will be innate to some leaders, some of which will have to be developed. And sometimes you have to look a little bit deeper and say, well, maybe the lack of the competencies or areas which could be improved in terms of those actually come down to the inherent qualities that your leaders have or that you look for in those leaders. And then sometimes a little bit deeper, what is the kind of leader, the sort of outlook of that leader, the sort of psychological issues that underscore some of those qualities. So sometimes you're looking at that sort of top level, look at the competencies. Sometimes we're going deeper to look at the qualities that underscore that, and then sometimes we really need to delve much deeper and say, well, what kind of leader, what kind of outlook you have. So that's kind of the way we approach it. So the strategic journey, you could say, starts from the outside in. It's where we bring in our FT journalists and we bring in some of our real sort of journalistic skills and faculty expertise. But then there's a learning journey. It starts with the person from the beginning, that self-knowledge, and then thinking about the kind of qualities that they have and what competencies that support. So this is not absolutely definitive. Companies will have their own list of qualities and competencies, but it's a way of identifying what is needed. Now, if we look at some of the qualities, we looked at 5, and some of you will agree with them, some of them will be slightly different, but it's well, we think it comes down to these things. That's of course integrity, the clarity of purpose, this ability to make decisions and execute on those decisions, and of course an interest in other people, just that general thing, and usually an empathetic interest. But there's one area that we're obviously going to focus on today, and that is the issue of resilience and energy to deliver. And here I'm just going to say a few words before handing over. You may look at some of your global operations and you may say, well, look, you know, we have leaders who are absolutely fantastic. They make great decisions. They're brilliant, sort of culturally aware, all those things we want. And yet somehow the project doesn't get completed. Something is stopping it. There are obstacles and we don't really understand why. And it may well be that the quality that's maybe lacking or needs to be improved or looked at is this issue of energy. How much energy have you got to just drive projects through, just to solve problems? Resilience is obviously the flip side of energy in many respects. Resilience is about how can you handle those challenges and stay on track? How can you deal with all these sort of these pressures on you and keep going with the project? Energy is physical. I mean, energy is a lot of things. We're going to talk about that in a bit, but energy is physical energy as well as mental energy. That's, you know, that you've got to fly around the world, maybe not so much now, but you've got to fly around the world. You have to handle a lot of things. There's a lot of pressures, daily pressures, physical pressures. That's about fitness. That's about sort of just that simple physical strength. But then there's the mental energy, the energy to, you know, master new subjects. I mean, the amount of new issues that you have to deal with, strategic, technical, you have to be on top of that. That requires huge amount of mental energy to keep going. Classically, problem solving, just keep going at it until you come to a sort of a reasonable conclusion. Be prepared to think about other ways to challenge those orthodoxies that you've always done business this way, but actually let's really work this one through. It's hard work. And of course, we all thrive, we're all working in an ambiguous situation. How do you mentally deal with a very insecure, ambiguous environment? Again, that requires great resilience to keep going, not sure whether you've got it right, but just keep pushing on. So this is where the resilience and the energy to deliver comes. This is the sort of competencies that stem from it. But then we might go deeper and say, well, look, looking at one's own self-knowledge, why might someone be more energetic? Why might someone have greater resilience than others? It may be that it comes down to your outlook on the world. Maybe you're not so ambitious, or maybe you're very ambitious. Maybe you want to change the world. Maybe you just want to pay off your mortgage and get to the next promotion, or whatever it might be. These are deeper questions that one has to go into. So in that diagnosis, what we want to understand is, are the competencies sufficient to deal with your external challenges in your market? Is it about the lack of resilience and lack of energy, or a surfeit of energy and resilience? And why would that be strong in some, weak in others, when you're hiring leaders, when you're promoting, when you're developing those leaders, when you're developing programs to enhance that aspect of you? Is it because the leader themselves has a certain way of looking at the world? They like to work with others, or maybe they don't like to work with others. Their worldview, their, you know, a general optimism or pessimism that might influence how much energy they have. So we look sort of top level, but we also like to go deeply into it when we diagnose. And I think it's on that context that I think I now want to hand over, I think, to Marieluise to talk about the kinds of energy and how it determines a sort of leader's performance. So with that, perhaps I can hand over. Is it Marieluise? Are you going to present? Yeah. Okay. I hope that's a helpful context where the real thinking, the real analysis now can take place. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Paul. And we'll be drawing on your pointers throughout. So welcome from my side, Marieluise Maiwald, and I wanted to dive into the definition of resilience straight away. As Paul said, it's crucial right now during the times of Corona, but it's been crucial before. We've been living in this VUCA environment where uncertainty is out there rampant. And so let's look at the classic definition of the good old favorite, the Oxford Dictionary. So it stresses the idea, it's a bit like the spring image in the middle, that we have a system that gets stressed, that gets pushed together, and like the spring, it kind of bounces back and it's back in its original position. And as we heard from Paul, I don't think that's enough. I think being back in your original position just is enough anymore. We need to grow and develop, both as individuals, as teams, as organizations. So I wanted to bring in the concept of Nassim Taleb, anti-fragility. You might have heard of him. He wrote The Black Swan and the book Anti-Fragility, unsurprisingly. And he talks about how systems need that pressure and that stress to grow, to develop and to become better. So think of your spring not just bouncing back into its original position, but actually becoming better. And I think it's a nice link with Paul's demonstration of the leadership framework, because when you look at the resilience category, it talks about thriving and excelling in difficult circumstances, risk-taking and learning. And so this is what we want to go with as our definition today. So really the idea was we wanted to call this webinar Beyond Resilience, Developing Anti-Fragility. It just sounded a little bit too technical, so we went with what we went with. Could we go to the next slide, please, Louis? And this is the tank that we're looking into, the 4 forms of energy that govern our lives that Paul so nicely talked about. The framework is taken from Jim Loehr and Tony Schwartz. The Power of Full Engagement, or On Form, are the books in reference, but it goes back to the days of Plato. I mean, this is old, ancient stuff. And I've given you the image of a brick wall, because these 4 different energy forms build on each other. We'll start by looking at physical energy, which is the foundation. It's our bodies. This is where everything else sits on. The others built on it, and there might be some things, well, a lot of things I'm sure you will have heard of before. But take this time throughout this webinar and really look at, what are you paying attention to? Are you really having equal focus on those 4 dimensions of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual energy? Or is your spider diagram, if you want to think of it, kind of dented at one point, and you need to pay attention and bring that back out? So with that lens, I invite you to have a look at yourself and your team, and maybe even your organization. Where is your corporate culture when it comes to taking pause and refueling yourself, or the emotional side of things? So just to remind ourselves, it's not just about feeling fit and happy, it's about performance. This is why we're doing this. This is a Headspring webinar. And so I'll be covering the first 2 dimensions, the physical energy and the emotional energy. And my lovely colleague Sudhanshu will be talking about the mental and the spiritual piece. So if we could go on to the physical energy slide. So this is crucial. This is the starting point. The quote I've given you here is from The Power of Full Engagement, and it kind of talks to the fact that this is crucial even if you have a desk job. It's the basis, as I said, of these 3 other bits. If we don't have physical energy, we cannot manage our emotions. We can't be alert, concentrated, and creative. And in the spiritual piece, we can't maintain that commitment to whatever our passion is or our purpose. Why do we even care? So in this physical energy section, we'll be looking at breathing and sleep, what we eat, when we eat, and different levels of fitness and recovery. So I hope you're ready, because we're going right into the breathing section. This is our basic fuel, our energy. And we've learned at COVID-19 times that especially our lungs are critical. So building lung capacity is something really helpful right now. So rather than explaining the box breathing technique, I thought, let's do a couple of rounds together. It's a Thursday morning for most of us in the UK. It's the last day of the working week because we've got tomorrow off. So let's rejuvenate and get ready for the rest of this webinar. This technique was invented by an ex-Navy SEAL, and it can help you to calm your nerves, relieve stress, deepen concentration, focus the mind. It's really effective with anxiety, insomnia, pain, and a friend of mine told me yesterday that her sister used it in labor. So I ask you, what's not to love? Before we begin, here are a few pointers. It's the rhythm that's indicated in the diagram. So we'll start by breathing out and then holding your breath, and then inhaling, hold your breath again, exhale. I'll talk you through it. It's on a count of 4, and we'll just keep on going around in that box. If it helps you, you might want to close your eyes and even put a hand on your belly so you can feel your diaphragm rising and falling. It's important to inhale and exhale through your nose. And when you hold, try not to kind of build up that internal pressure of, oh my God, I'm holding my breath. But try to be really relaxed and sort of go, it's okay. The next in-breath or out-breath is just around the corner. So let's begin. Exhale fully. And now hold for 3, 4. Inhale through your nose. 3, 4. And hold. 3, 4. Exhale. 3, 4. And hold. 3, 4. Inhale through your nose. 3, 4. Hold. 3, 4. Exhale. 3, 4. And hold. 3, 4. Inhale. 3, 4. Hold. 3, 4. Exhale. 3, 4. Thank you very much for this tiny little taster of the box breathing method. The inventor says it's best be done for 5 minutes. So please feel free to keep on breathing in a box shape as the webinar continues. And we'll be able to have a look at sleep next, Loic. Thank you. So apologies for being a rather dense slide. The reason for that is because it's really important and there's a lot to say about sleep. So you can already spot this interconnectedness of topics. Sleep affects the body, the mind, the emotion, and we can see that all our building blocks are coming back together yet again. And so the problem we're dealing with right now is that our bodies weren't built for our current sitting down kind of lifestyle. We're meant to hunt by day, sleep by night, never travel more than a few dozen miles a day. And what do? We fly around, we create jet lag, we sit in front of laptops, excuse me, I know you're doing it right now, so am I. And then, you know, in the evening, we kind of couch on the sofa. So it's not really what we were built to do. And then we're surprised when we find that our bodies are not machines and they're not operating like machines. And so we need to give them that fuel, those 4 different dimensions we're talking about right now. If you don't get enough sleep, you will find that your immune system suffers, and anybody who has kind of crammed in all the work just before they left for vacation and didn't sleep enough and then get to relax at the beach might find themselves really quickly in the hotel room rather than tanning at the sea. It regulates body temperature, hormone levels, digestion, and appetite. And again, if you've done an all-night party, I'm not excluding myself on this account. So you'll remember that you'll get really cold just before the sun comes up, and that you're really craving something to eat, the famous midnight munchies. That's why good parties happen in the kitchen. But we're talking about performance at work here as well. And so sleep affects our mind. It's really important for concentration, attention, reflexes, decision-making, and judgment. And this is why drowsy driving can be almost as dangerous as drunken driving. If you think about being awake from 6 a.m. in the morning until midnight, that's an 18-hour day, you will have a blood alcohol level of 0.05. Just as a reference point, 0.08 means you're actually drunk. So that is quite scary. And of course, sleep is really important for memory and for learning. So Sudhanshu and I are hoping you're all going to have a great night's sleep tonight and maybe tomorrow night, and really let everything from this webinar sink in and settle into your system. And last but not least, it also affects our emotions. So we know that sleep kind of allows feel-good chemicals such as dopamine and serotonin to flood your body. So waking up happier after a good night's sleep is something really, really real. On the flip side of that, of course, sleep and mood are a two-way street. So if you sleep well, you're less angry, you're less stressed and mentally exhausted. On the other side, if you sleep badly, you're all those things, which will make it harder to go back to sleep. And so you're already stressed, you're already exhausted, and you're thinking, God, I need to go to sleep, and you're going down that downward spiral and struggling even more. So Laura and Schwartz's recommendation is to go to bed early and wake up early. I have to say, as an owl, I disagree. I like my late nights and my late mornings, and I think I'm just as productive with that. Matthew Walker, who wrote Why We Sleep, actually says what you need is 7 to 8 hours. He hasn't found anybody who can perform on less than that. But he says it doesn't really matter where they sit within the night. But consistency, of course, is really helpful. So having your alarm or your Fitbit kind of give you an alarm, or your phone to tell you to go to sleep is really, really helpful. So let's look at food and drink, the actual fuel that we're having. Loic, this is an animated slide. If you can just click us through this. Keep on going. Yeah, keep on going. Boom, 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 da-dum. Yep, and one more. One more, there we go. So basically, no, you're good, thank you. Basically, what this is supposed to show you is that there's tons of information out there right now, especially due to coronavirus. Nutritional information is on the web, and I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not even a particularly good cook. I'm a leadership development expert. So I thought, if you're interested in this, do your own research and find out what really works for you. All I ask you is, extend this to your team and maybe your company. Are you thinking about food in terms of snacks for meetings, make them healthy, nuts and lots of water, maybe some fruit? And Laura and Schwartz again have their recommendations. They say eat 5 to 6 small meals daily, breakfast, really important, balanced, healthy diet. You all know the pyramid that's behind, and eating the rainbow. Minimize simple sugars and drink lots of water. And so we'll move on swiftly to exercise here. And I'm sorry, you're getting a whistle-stop tour of all these 4 dimensions within only an hour. Obviously, if we'd be doing this within the program, we'll spend much more time on each of these. So in the exercise category, I think it's really interesting that if we look at the primary markers for physical activity, there are strength, endurance, and flexibility. And these are precisely the same markers that we could use for our emotional, mental, and spiritual capacity, meaning that we talk about someone who's mentally tough or emotionally flexible. And so this is really important to build in the body as a reference point. And again, it's pretty intuitive, and I'm sure you've heard this again and again. Move regularly, ideally daily, and right now, ideally get outside to move. And guess what? Running for the bus counts. If it brings up your heart rate, it's exercise. Create variety. So bring in strength and cardiovascular training as well as your stretching to hit those 3 different points. And vary your intensity. Make sure you also have time for recovery. And again, we're talking about productivity. Why does this matter at work? I love the expression of cognitive candy. Physical activity is cognitive candy. It comes from the biologist John Medina. And what he says is, as we already mentioned, evolutionary, we are built to be walking up to, say, 12 miles a day. So we had really, really fit bodies. We don't do that anymore. We sit in front of laptops and sofas and TVs, and so our physical and our mental health is suffering. There are tons of studies that show that exercise makes us more creative and more innovative. It improves memory by stimulating the growth of new cells in the hippocampus. It combats stress by increasing neurotransmitters such as serotonin. So you're doing yourself, your team, and your company a real service if you move your body. And again, as a company, it might be worthwhile to think about how you can support that through breaks, through gym memberships, you know, stuff like that. And the same goes for your corporate learning programs. You could start them with a brisk walk or a Tai Chi session in the morning. I've done all of that. And let's go to a little bit of trivia just to lighten it up. I've given you tons of stats, I know. So on this 10,000 steps a day business, you know, I'm wearing my Fitbit and it tells me, you know, God, didn't make it today. Where does this thing actually come from? You can use this in your next pub quiz. And I can tell you it's completely arbitrary. Hit the reveal button, Loic. It comes from a marketing campaign in Japan in the 60s. So this was just about the time before the Tokyo Olympics, and the first step counter was called Manpo Kai. I'm sorry if I slaughtered that, which translates into 10,000 step meter. There is pretty much no research that says 10,000 step is a magic number. And so hit it again, Loic. The moral of the story is any exercise is better than no exercise. So whether you're moving 6,000, 8,000, 12 or 15,000, you're doing yourself a favor. Next slide, please. Just checking in. You're all still box breathing, right? Okay. That finishes up our section on physical energy, and we're now going to look at emotional energy. Next slide, please. We have the energy grid here. It should really be called the emotional grid for obvious reasons. But let's again experience it rather than describe it. So the dimensions are high energy, low energy, and you can be feeling positive, pleasant, or negative, unpleasant. So let's see how this grid works. Next slide, please. This is a little quiz. So ideally you'll have something to write or your fingers to keep track. I'll be flashing 7 different emotions on the screen up at you, and you decide which quadrant they fit. For each one you get right, you give yourself a point. Let's get started. Hopeless. Where does that sit in high or low energy, positive, negative? Make your guess and reveal, Loic. Yeah, it's down there in the bottom left. And then count whether you got this right or wrong. Next one, please. Confident. Where's confident? Loic? Thank you. Hope you got that one right. Next, please. Defensive. And top left. Thank you. Next one. Mellow. Thank you. And next one, relieved. And I think we've got 2 more, impatient. Thank you. And the last one, optimistic. Thank you. So those were 7 emotions. Let's get a feel from you. How well did you do? The first poll is coming up, and Loic, the magic master in the background, is going to bring that up, and we'll see how you're doing. Did you get 7, 5 or 6, 3 or 4, or 2 or less? And let's see, Loic, how are we doing for numbers? And just to let you know at this point, if we would be doing this in a room, oh, people are doing really well, brilliant, excellent news. Because what I meant to tell you is if we were doing this in a room, we would be having this on the floor and kind of have discussions of where does that emotion fit in? Is it closer to that? Is it closer to the next quadrant? And have nuances and debates, because people experience emotions differently. And so it's not quite as clear cut as I made it in this little quiz. And so let's have a little bit of an overview of exactly where those emotions you were just quizzed on sit. As you can see, some are a bit higher on the energy, some a bit further out on the emotional side. All right, so let's actually review those quadrants one by one. We're looking at the burnout zone. So there are three types of burnouts. There's the traditional burnout that we all think about when we hear the word, and that's an overload kind of set of burnouts. So it's people work harder, they're more frantic, they're willing to risk their health and their personal life in pursuit of their ambition, and they're coping by complaining. And again, with all of these, don't just think about yourself and where you might be sitting on the grid, but also think about your team and even further, your department or the organization. So just listen in on this, taking it through that lens. Let me tell you about the second burnout, which is an under challenge. No, sorry, we're still in the burnout section. Then the under challenge burnout. So the under challenge burnout is the clear opposite. It means you're not being challenged, you're bored, you're doing really mundane tasks that don't lead to any new learning. And so people feel cynicism, they feel cynic. They're avoiding new responsibility just because they're so stuck in their box, and they're just disengaged, this idea of presenteeism. As we heard from Nassim Taleb earlier, a complex system is actually weakened or killed when it's deprived of stress. So we need some stress. And then lastly, we have the neglect burnout, which is occurring if people aren't supported. They feel helpless at work, they feel incompetent and unable to keep up with the demands, and so they just get really passive and unmotivated. And just to finish up the section, I wanted to mention that in April 2019, the World Health Organization, which we're hearing about a lot these days, has acknowledged burnout as an official disease. So it is really important we talk about these things. Let's go one up to the survival zone. Thank you very much. And we talk about it as the survival or the stress zone. So some energy has returned back into your body, but it's not really in that helpful a way. Here you find stress addiction, a love for firefighting, last-minute deliveries. Does anybody know of these? And it's that idea of working at a feverish pace without breaks that can actually make you feel addicted. There are stress hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol that give you that seductive rush, the so-called adrenaline high. And we also assume that other people will think we're more important if we're busier and we're more stressed. It gives us status. So the danger we have in that category from that high intensity, if we work in it for too long, we lose the capacity to shift back into a more relaxed state. We get stuck in that overdrive, hence adrenaline junkies. So take a breath, we don't want that. And we move into the positive emotions, into the performance zone. And this is what we're aiming for, at least for some of the time. And as you can see, we're still having some of those adjectives that look at, stress. So there's challenge, there's a feeling of being proud, of optimistic. So the stresses haven't gone away. It's just that with this high energy, positive emotion, we feel like we can succeed. The stress is not an enemy in our life. It's actually the key to growth. Think back to anti-fragility. and the idea that pressure makes diamonds. So we have a choice here. To perform optimally, we just need to be able to shift into these positive emotions. And one way of doing that is by reframing our stress away from an idea of threat to an opportunity, a challenge, or maybe even an adventure. And then let's look at this really important zone, the recovery zone. And we do want to consciously spend time here because that allows us to go back up to the performance zone. So we need that balance between expenditure of energy, stress, kind of performing out, and then the renewal of energy and recovery and kind of bringing it back in. So the rhythm we're looking for is an oscillation. It's kind of an up and down, and that's what nature does so beautifully. We have day and night, we have the seasons, we've got the cycles of the moon, and our bodies crave this up and down, this oscillation, this stress and relaxation. The trap we're all too often getting kind of stuck in is that effort addiction. So if you talk to athletes and you say, hey, you know, you really need to go into recovery, they go, oh God, I hate it in there. Because we believe that more effort will bring us better results. It's an effort that we trust, but we really need to make conscious time to go into that zone or category. And the great news is it doesn't need to be for very long. So you don't have to book a full holiday. The best tennis players in the world find their recovery when they walk back into their corner for the next serve, and that is their recovery time. So ways to recover, and this is critical. There are as many ways to recover as there are people on this planet. Everyone is different. And one person's recovery zone might be another person's survival zone. So whatever floats your boat. You've got the basic physical recovery, which is sleep, nutrition, hydration. We talked about those before. But then we've got the rejuvenating life activities. And that's really anything that brings you joy and relaxation. And it could be as diverse as doing a puzzle or a tough workout at the gym, going to an all-night rave or meditating, spending time with friends and family, or really just having a really quiet night in by yourself. And so for this, it's really important to know not just what your preference is, but also what your partner's preference is. So let's take another little poll and see how you are doing. This is a snapshot in time, and Loic, the master of a poll, is yes. Where are you right now at 11:38 on a Thursday in this webinar, knowing that it can change at any point, you're not stuck there? Are you in the survival zone, the performance zone, a burnout, or are you in recovery? We're waiting for this, and we know that, you know, you might be in a really relaxed recovery zone right now, but then this email hits and you're kind of thrown into stress/survival. So it's really just a moment in time. Let's see. Oh, we're actually quite split. How interesting is that? So we do have people in performance, we're people in recovery, which I was sort of expecting. It's a webinar, you might just take it all in consciously. We do have burnout. I mean, there's lots of pressures on those of us who are still working right now. And this uncertainty due to Corona isn't doing us any favors. And we've got survival. So let's do a second test, a second try. Think about your team, whether it's the team you're leading or the team you're part of, as a whole, the team as a whole. I know it's got different people, but if you were to take a snapshot of that team today, where do you think they'd be? And we're doing this to give you some tools and sort of open up conversations, and I'll come to that in a second. So where is your team? Laura, can you show us? We've got a lot more survival, a little more performance, but that's interesting. So I see that it's sort of shifted towards survival and less recovery. So people are quite busy. So if we can go to the final slide of this section, please. One further down. Yeah, keep on going. Another one, and we'll stop on this one. So with this, I just think this is just the starting point. Unfortunately, we have a webinar of about, I don't know, 150, 200 people here. So we can't really have an in-depth debrief of this. But what I wanted to give you is I wanted to give you some tools to have that conversation with your team and to really talk about what a lot of people call mental health, our emotional states, in quite a nicely structured way. It's a neutral tool to use. So I've put together these slides as well as my speaker notes that I've used, and they are attached to this webinar already, if you can spot them. If you can't see them right now, don't worry about it, because we'll be transitioning over to Sudhanshu. Loic is also sending them out. And you can use this and actually use the last bit as a jumping off point to talk to people about what does it feel like in your quadrant? What are you missing? What are you gaining? Where do you need to go, and what help might you need to move into a healthier state? So just know that this is available for you to please use, both within COVID and outside of COVID. I think it's such a helpful tool. But having said all that, Sudhanshu is now talking about mental and spiritual energy. Over to you, Sudhanshu.
Thank you very much, Emil. Delighted to be here, and good morning, good afternoon, all of you. I'm just going to build a little bit on what we just heard. Let's talk a little bit about mental energy. All right, so the time that you're feeling cognitively at your best. And if I were to ask you that question, you'd say things like my ability to concentrate, focus, whatever you call it. Or some of you might say clarity of thinking, that comes up all the time. Or you might say when I'm not distracted, right? So there's a clear sense that we have in us where we talk about good mental energy. Now, as you can see very clearly, you cannot really separate out mental energy from emotional energy or even physical energy. I mean, you cannot be feeling emotionally lousy and saying mentally I'm feeling absolutely fine. I mean, you've got to be a psychopath for that, right? So it's not going to happen otherwise to normal people. So they're all interconnected, and the idea is not to break them up into boxes, because you can never really do that. Although there is a tendency, and this is something we need to talk about, because when you talk about mental energy, there is a little bit of a problem over here, because for the last 200 years or so, we've often made the mistake of seeing mental energy as being associated with the ability to reason. The think in the cold light of the day, as we call it. And unfortunately, it's connected to a whole bunch of things. It's connected to gender at the same time. The assumption that men are able to think more clearly and rationally than women are. There's a lot of mythology connected with this, and so it makes the mental energy part a little more problematic. So here's a straightforward fact for everyone. You cannot disassociate mental functions of the brain from the emotional functions of the brain. You just cannot do that. There's no way you can separate out the two. There is nobody on the planet except for the psychopaths who can do that well, all right? So let's not even try and break the division up into mental and emotional. They are intricately connected. So let's spend a little bit of time on what good mental energy is all about, right? So if you notice, the problem with mental energy is that a lot of it gets squandered in everyday thinking, all right, or base level thinking. So one of the things I often like to talk about is that just because you have a brain between your ears doesn't mean you know how to think, right? Now, the kind of stuff that we traditionally call thinking or ordinarily call thinking is pretty low grade, low level thinking. And if you really watch the way it operates, it's almost like the thoughts are appearing by themselves. They have a momentum of their own. They keep popping up and popping up and popping up. And then if you're not careful, one thought leads to another thought, and that leads to another one, and that leads to another one. And before you know it, you've got an avalanche of thoughts, especially if you come from a negative place, that can be extremely toxic. So you could be sitting over here right now listening to ML and me, and then a thought comes up in your head, gosh, did I lock the door, or did I not lock the door? You're not going anywhere right now. Did I turn off the oven or the gas hob before I left home? Or darn, did I miss a call that I was to make just now? The moment you have a thought that randomly comes into you, before you know it, that thought leads to an avalanche of other thoughts. So this is something we often notice about ourselves, and yet what we try and do is then we try and control those thoughts, which leads us to another dreadful muddle, because who is the controller and who is the thought, right? They're not two different things. So one of the things we've got to learn to do better is, if you really want mental energy and clarity of thought, it's an asymptotic function, which means that it happens when you put your house in order. You got to do a bunch of other things to allow clarity to happen. So clarity of thought manifests itself. You can't chase it. You cannot sit down and say, I've got to focus. It never works, right? It doesn't work, because the person who is trying to focus is no different from the focus itself. Think about it, right? Both are thoughts. So it's like thinking trying to cure thinking, which never works at all. So you've got to be able to put your mind at rest in order for clarity of thinking to emerge. So mental energy is a byproduct. You cannot chase it. You cannot go after it saying, I've got to develop mental energy right now. It doesn't work like that. Now, if you notice, a lot of people, a lot of us, for a large portion of the day, we operate at an extremely low level of mental energy, which means that your thoughts are largely appearing out of the survival zone, right? So they are either anxiety related, or they are past related, or future related. Either you're worrying about something that is yet to come, or you're worrying about something that's come and gone, right? So they're either past related or future related. They're anxiety related, they're fear related, or they're self-related. It's always about me. So what will I do next? Did I do the right thing? Did I eat the right thing? What should I? They're extremely obsessive thoughts. And that occupies a lot of our mental space, by and large. So we're operating at a very reactive survival mode of operation. If you're not doing that, we're doing something else, which I call the clever mode of operation, where you're applying your mind to solve some problems, but you're clever because you're relying on your past experience, your past expertise, and your competence to do that. And that makes us kind of smug at times, right? Have you noticed how expert people behave? There's a little smugness to them. It's like they've seen all the problems before and they know how to solve them. And that doesn't work either. I mean, take a look at what's going on in the world right now. Cleverness is not going to solve this problem. We need a different mental energy that's got to come from a very different place. And so fortunately, we all have access to a third function in our brains, which is a little more mindful, where we are able to look at things from a slightly different perspective. There is very little of the me in that. There is a lot more awareness of what's going on outside. There's a lot more awareness of who we are and what's happening within me. So I call that the mindful mindset. Now, again, how do you activate that mindful mindset? Can you really sit down and concentrate and say, I'm going to make the mindful mindset happen? No. It's asymptotic, as I call it, right? So therefore, there are a few tricks you can use. So for example, I call this the beginner's mindset. And I picked this term up from Buddhism because they always talk about the beginner's mindset. And the beginner's mindset for me consists of 5 things that you can practice on a daily basis. The first one is generosity. Give of yourself. Be generous. With whatever you do, be generous. In the act of being generous, you open up parts of your mind that hitherto are closed. It also takes the focus away from about yourself. You take it away from that self-obsessive thinking. It's about generosity. Number 2, practice empathy. Empathy is one of the most complex functions we carry inside ourselves. Practice it. Show interest in the other person's story. Show interest in what's going on. But it's not idle interest of reading up your WhatsApp messages because you're idly interested in these things. That's noise. That's not empathy. Empathy is about truly trying to shift the perspective from you to the other, right? So generosity, empathy. The third one is curiosity. Stay curious. You know, curiosity requires an innocence that we lose when we become experts. Stay curious. Ask questions about the world that feels like a child asking questions. You know, don't forget that some of the greatest scientific discoveries were born out of very innocent questions. And the most important one that you can remember is Albert Einstein saying, "What would the world look like if I were to sit on a beam of light and ride with it?" It's a very innocent question. It gave rise to the theory of relativity. All right, so it's curiosity. The fourth one is humility. There's nothing like good old humility to clear your mind. All right, so these are all tested and proven things that you can try out for yourself. And the last one is openness, right? Openness. It's easy to think about it, but you know what? The sound that we produce in our minds is much louder than anything outside. In order to hear those outside sounds, in order to listen to people, in order to be truly open to information that you may not even agree with in the first place, it's hard. It requires a lot of cognitive effort. But when you start practicing it, when you start truly practicing what it means to be open, you find that you start generating a new kind of mental energy inside you. So just to repeat again, generosity, empathy, curiosity, humility, and openness. That's what I call the beginner's mindset. And that leads me on to the next slide, if you don't mind, Loic, if you can just get to the one it's a very close, it's not even a close cousin, it's a sibling of everything we've talked about so far, and that's the spirit energy. And this, I mean, I'll just take 2 or 3 minutes on this one, because how do you talk about this? How do you talk about something that is entirely ineffable, right? I mean, it's like no one's seen this, and yet we all know there is something in us that cannot be pinpointed, that cannot be reduced, cannot be tracked by any means we have, and we often call it the spirit. When we use the word spirit, we talk about being moved, or we talk about having a calling, or we talk about something higher beckons me to do something, right? That's what that world is. That's that world of spiritual energy. It's got nothing to do with religion, not at all. But people who feel a spiritual sense of spiritual energy, they do feel 1 or 2 distinct sensations inside them. The first one is a sense that we don't really end here, but we extend into the world, and there's a sense of interconnectedness with so much around us, right? So we feel connected to something much greater than what we are. And in so doing, it automatically takes the arrow away from me. It's no longer self-obsessive, it flows outwards. That's one thing that happens with spiritual energy. The second sense of spiritual energy is close enough where you feel you're drawn to do something because of a higher calling, something that we call purpose. You know, we have no idea if the universe has a purpose or not. I don't know. I mean, there are times when you think it has, and yet there are times when something happens that is utterly so random, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. When you go through an experience of that kind, or when you see someone go through a horrific experience of that kind, you think, gosh, is the whole thing just utterly random? Am I in a random universe? We don't know. That's a fact. But the fact is, another fact is that we might be in a random, purposeless universe, but we all require purpose in our lives. If we don't have it, we have to construct it. We have to build it. And purpose and spiritual energy have a lot to do with each other, because when you have a clear sense of purpose, that is not about you. I think we got to qualify that, because even despots have purpose. right? So it's not just having a purpose, but a purpose that is not about you, and a purpose that is about giving. It's a purpose that makes you behave as though you're in service of something else. That's that guiding spiritual energy which allows us to feel connected to something much greater than what we are. It allows us to expand our consciousness and operate in an entirely different way. All right, so Loic's back, and I think the time's running out for me to say anything anymore, but I hope this has given you a kind of a feel for what we are talking about. These are things that can be eminently practiced. It's like building a muscle, right? It's a spiritual muscle, it's a mental muscle. So I hope you can try out some of these things that we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhanshu. So I'd like to open the floor to questions. We did have a few questions come in, but if anybody has other questions, please send them in. So one of the first questions is, are negative emotions totally useless?
Sudhanshu, you had shorter time. Do you want to take this?
No, they're not useless at all, because every emotion we have is a guide to understanding who we are. You see, human beings we are in a constant process of self-discovery, right? So we need ways to understand ourselves, and our emotions do point out the way. Now, to wallow in negative emotions is dysfunctional. But to have a negative emotion, but to be able to watch it, to be able to understand it, where it's coming from, what's it, what is its cause? What's the pattern behind it? It's enormous learning in there. I would suggest that we learn to watch our negative emotions, learn to figure out the grammar behind it, the logic behind it, and that can become a big springboard for learning in all of us. Absolutely. Thank you.
Sudhanshu.
Thank you.
Another question that we have here is, how can we measure somehow our levels of energy precisely?
Well, again, I mean, we're having this spider diagram, and I come back to that, and we've got two more dimensions now: the spirit energy and the mental energy. I think it's, if you look at it from a performance perspective, is, can you perform? Do you actually deliver what you set out to do? While you still feel happy and fit and fulfilled and connected to that higher purpose that Sudhanshu was talking about? Or do you feel worn out physically, emotionally drained, and just sort of unconnected? But it comes back to that spider diagram, I would say, where you kind of want to track all your 4 dimensions.
Thank you, Marieluise. Another question that comes in is, how do you find the purpose of life?
Sudhanshu, that's yours.
All right. No, I think it's a lifelong search. I think Mark Twain said it beautifully. He said the two greatest days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Right? It's a lifelong search. So here's my quick answer. Rather than ask the question, what's my life's purpose? Ask another question, which is, when do I feel purposeful? And can I do more of that? And make a conscious choice. For example, here we are locked down at this moment in time. You may have a phone call to make, and just before the phone call, you can ask the question, how do I turn up purposefully in this phone call? Right? These are the small steps that help us to close the gap between what we are doing now and what that big purpose may look like. Some of us know what that is because we worked hard at trying to find that out. Some of us are in the process of finding it out, but it's an eternal process of self-discovery. And by the way, just because I know my purpose doesn't mean I behave purposefully every day. It's a constant learning process. We are human beings in pursuit of self-discovery. That's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhanshu. So I'm a bit conscious of time. We'll make sure to answer all the questions via email after this webinar. So I would like to thank you everyone who participated today, as well Marieluise, Sudhanshu, and Paul for attending the webinar today. We'll send you a recording, and as well you'll have the document attached to that email. So I wish you all a very good day. Please be safe, and hopefully for the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.